So the battle's over and we get our denouement, or the return to normalcy, and the kingdom is throwing a party for us. We talk to Alistair about the battle and how the Grey Wardens are asking us how the Archdemon died and why we did not, and he asks us what to say to these guys, and we tell him to tell them the truth.
That a Maleficar saved you and then ran off to have my demon baby, that has a certain ring to it, right? No, I suppose I'll just keep that to myself. I can shrug and look stupid. It's a talent.
Now, why wouldn't we try and figure out this obvious problem with the Grey Wardens? If archdemons are a natural phenomenon and we had such a difficulty maintaining and getting Grey Wardens to survive the whole joining process, why shouldn't we research solutions? Why shouldn't we seek out Morrigan or Flemeth to figure out this problem? Now, this is interesting because this ultimately becomes one of the similar causes our character takes on in Dragon Age Inquisition, or at least we hear about it. How to reverse the joining process. Probably because Grey Wardens are still people, and blights don't happen for hundreds of years. This is also much more sensible than going on a quest for the Urn of Sacred Ashes just to heal a sick lord of some area of the country. We're talking about saving the entire country from a natural destructive force and having the destroyers of that force understand their role and hopefully giving them more options. Else Grey Wardens are stuck in this medieval suicidal role of evil god essences transmigrating into dragons for unknown means or reasons. This is also a perfectly acceptable setup to go and find Morrigan, especially despite her desire to not be pursued. And amazingly, our brother survived the entire war and all of its events. He got injured early, way before Ostagar, and was out of commission for months. Now that the plot's been resolved, this scene relates to our revenge story with Tim Curry.
I woke up 2 weeks later in a chastened hut, wounded and feverish. By the time I was able to sneak out of the wilds, you were already marching to Denerim.
Originally I thought a literal chastened hut, possibly Flemeth's, but the chastened or the chastened wilders are a tribe of humans, and I don't recall the narrative directly telling us, or at least for the casual player to remember this at this point, to recall that bit of trivia. Fergus wants to go back to High Ever and clean up the mess that Tim Curry made. We know that we have to take it back, and we have at least a company of archers from Alfstana to help us in doing so.
I've been asked by the Chantry to return to the Urn of Sacred Ashes. I need to make sure it's protected. Maybe pilgrims can even begin going there again.
Yeah, so said pilgrims can collectively fall down pits in platform puzzles and get attacked by perverted poetic poltergeists. And through attrition, if said pilgrims do succeed, there won't be anything left of the ashes of the urn. We tend to look back at Dragon Age Origins through our rose-tinted glasses. When we replay it, it's not quite the same. It contains great giant series of fantasy genre elements to the point of, oh look, they're doing that, all set within a spiritual successor to the Baldur's Gate game experience. There's lots of exploration of detailed maps, real-time with pause gameplay, and of course a much more diverse series of party commentary and scenarios. Throw in a higher budget, and you're bound to please a newcomer to the experience at the time, and those who love the old BioWare isometric style games. But all plots come from characters, and it is those characters we remember most in stories. However, as well versed and vocal as Claudia Black and other such actors were, Morrigan is simply no Viconia DeVere. She's just egotistical and snarky. Liliana is no Aerie. She's just nice and friendly. Zevran is no Herr Dalis or Yoshimo, but he comes close, and I can keep going. Now that doesn't mean these characters should mimic the others, nor necessarily surpass them in narrative usage or story involvement, even though that would actually help. They should at least be more dramatic than their previous incarnations, aside from just being really great window dressing. They have more spoken lines, they are fully voiced, have 3D models with articulated faces, and yet their tales don't resonate as well for some reason. The limitations of technology in Baldur's Gate allow the writing and small amount of poignant scenes to be colored by a few lines of voice acting, sometimes a wonderful stinger of music, which change the quiet tone to something of concern, or care, or fear, or excitement, or love and longing, or remorse, or whatever those 2D companions felt like expressing, into something a little bit more memorable. More technology and more writing does not necessarily mean better. And while he is no John Irenicus, thankfully we do get Loghain, our main bad guy, and the highlight of the story. A real villain that BioWare writers and what Dragon Age gets right, because he's not entirely clear of his choices, though he is very clear on his convictions. He is flawed and in direct opposition to us. You can see by people's opinion of him, even of those within the game. They dislike him, they respect him, they fear him, and possibly hate him, But do they actually want him dead? Do said people want to curse him to the same fate as you? Do they even need him to survive? Would they sentence him to live out his life in an order of warriors he rightfully hates, all fueled by his love of his country? Or do you sacrifice him at Fort Dracan? Or do you simply give in to Alistair's desire for revenge? That choice or choices afterward are the meaningful experience of what Dragon Age Origins comes down to. Dealing with the villain. What do you do with Loghain? Making such a choice has two sides, and all of those opinions have a degree of merit. Can we simply eliminate an obstacle just because he's an enemy, or should we be practical and see him as a resource that can potentially help stop the Archdemon? These are the kinds of questions games with choices that say they matter should have in them, no matter how flawed and drawn out their narrative becomes. Choices in a game must have narrative value and at least personal value, and the choice of what to do with Loghain is certainly one there. Politics is or should have been a major aspect, but it gets dissolved as the Landsmeet plays out, and you have very little influence on that, which goes the trial by combat route just for the sake of it. All roads seem to lead to the combat engine, unfortunately, when the astute player who does everything right and has the whole country behind him still has to face off against a sword and shield opponent. The two plots in the game, at least through the human noble origin story, follow revenge on a sub-boss and to save the world. The first is tacked on as an intro, and ultimately the villain of Tim Curry has more gravitas than the scene or act of getting revenge on him does. Of course, anyone would have that compared to our voiceless protagonist. By that time, the setting and scenarios are a bit forced, convoluted, drawn out, especially as the Landsmeet slowly comes by. The more origins do increase replay value of the game, of course, by coloring it slightly differently here and there, but not by much.
I deserved more.
The lack of a voice protagonist does hinder the drama, which is fine for the classic BioWare fan, but not when the majority of or the rest of the production is voiced. It feels very out of place. It was okay in Baldur's Gate because you had a voice kit for gameplay and it worked as the companions provided reactions to your choices based on reputation and what you did. It was sparse and it worked. In Dragon Age Origins, you also get the voice kits for gameplay, but it feels empty everywhere else. The star of the show, which should be you, become emotionless, quiet, reserved, and everything has to be implied, even though we have a voice for you in combat. This makes relationships and other such scenarios forced, if at a minimum one-sided, compared to Dragon Age 2, which, as silly as some of the dialogue was, it was actual dialogue and not a monologue.
You can't do this to me. I'll have you all flayed. I'm the Arl of Denerim.
Some may say the lack of a voice protagonist is a psychological method of putting the player into the player character, same with customization of their face and other such things. And even though Dragon Age was in production before Mass Effect, this simple exclusion hinders the experience. Of course, the whole dialogue wheel of Mass Effect didn't exist yet, for better or worse. The title itself is a bit confusing, having only 3 high dragons in the whole game, 2 of which are optional, creating a setting purely for the service of throwing every random fantasy trope it can afford. I think the only one I didn't see or could think of were vampires, which, considering the blood splatter effect, would seem rather obvious to include a character who doesn't need to bite people and he just hangs out with you as you slaughter everyone that moves, and he happens to be really good at doing your laundry. There were elves, dwarves, ogres, spirits, goblin equivalents, werewolves, ents, golems, a dream world where you also go where you die, possession, zombies, a whole host of demons, transmigrations of souls, ancient tombs, a magical school full of wizards, 2 ancient orders of knights immortals, a nasty evil blood disease that turns all living things to their evil versions, and of course a few dragons big and small. So what we can rightfully say about Dragon Age Origins is it's big. There's lots of content, the lore is large and for the most part consistent, and there are loads of characters and quests, all within a linear story that you can solve in various order. The production values are great, and the story gives you enough illusion of choices at the start as things come to a point. And that's when the seams become noticeable. It doesn't break the narrative, although there are times where I felt it does, but it makes the flaws bigger and stranger, as my commentary previously has shown. Perhaps it's that flawed strangeness of a magical medieval setting that works. After being bombarded by so much fantasy content, you can't really notice the flaws too much. It's the scenes at the camp, the party commentary, the jokes and remarks about each other. That's what's special. The constant affirmation that you, the player character, are doing well despite being at ground zero. Is your drunken dwarf really making sexual jokes all the time? Does your exotic warrior or mysterious witch really care about anyone else, or what even's going on? And of course, with all popular media, there is this soundtrack. There's this strange, ethereal, dark, generic fantasy sound to everything. You know an elf is involved when you hear that deep or light oboe sound. Leliana's song is a bit out of place, but it makes sense, just not with the same voice actress. But the first song on the OST titled Dragon Age Origins sums up the experience nicely. A female vocalist singing incomprehensible words, the tom-tom drums sound like a war beat, and the trumpets and strings showcase your typical epic full orchestral stuff. But that one song that stands out, it will ever cement what Dragon Age Origins is to me. It's a similar feeling to reading an especially long chapter in a book, similar to completing a difficult main story quest. It's the feeling of relief of having gone through something harrowing, not entirely unpleasant, and being victorious in the end. And of course, talking to your friends about it. This, to me, is what Dragon Age Origins is all about.
You called. As you wish.
Have I ever told you I really like the way you wear your hair? It's very nice and it suits you. Simple. Not like the elaborate hairstyles we wore in Orlais. They involved flowers, ribbons, jewels. One year, feathers were all the rage, and Lady Elise decided she needed to outdo everyone else, and actually wore live songbirds in her voluminous hair. The chirping was quite charming for a while, but you must realize, terrified little birdies often have loose bowels. Yes, you can imagine what she looked like by the end of the evening. But I was trying to say something nice to you, wasn't I? Oh, forgive me. My mind wanders so. It's just that I feel so comfortable talking to you, like I could say anything and you wouldn't judge me.